The night was silent, but not peaceful. In the ruined streets of a small alien village, shadows stretched across broken walls and empty homes. The war had left scars, but some wounds were deeper than ruins. They were inside the heart. A young alien boy, no more than 10 years old, walked slowly through the darkness. His big eyes were full of fear, but also full of something stronger: hope. He clutched a thin blanket around his shoulders and looked around as if searching. Finally, he saw a figure standing near the broken gate of the village. It was a human soldier, tired and wounded, resting against a wall. His armor was scratched, his face covered with dust, but his eyes were calm. The boy stopped, trembling, then whispered in a broken voice, "Human, no one is helping my mother. She cries every night since my father left." The human lifted his head, surprised. He had heard many things in his life, but the child's words cut through him like a blade. For a moment he thought the boy had mistaken him for someone else, but the alien child stood firm, his small fists shaking, his eyes pleading. "Please come, she needs help, she is dying inside and nobody cares." The human hesitated. This was not his mission, not his responsibility. He was only passing through the village on his way to a safe zone. Helping aliens with family problems was the last thing he should do. And yet something about the child's voice held him in place. He sighed and finally nodded. "Show me," he said, his voice low. The boy's face lit up with relief. Without waiting, he turned and ran into the shadows. The human followed, his heavy boots crunching against the stone road. The streets smelled of smoke and hunger, and the silence felt unnatural. It was the silence of people who had stopped caring. They reached a small broken house at the edge of the village. The door was crooked, the windows covered with dirt. The boy pushed the door open slowly, as if afraid of waking something inside. The human stepped in and looked around. Inside the house, there was no light, only the weak glow of a dying fire in the corner. The air was cold, the table empty. On the floor sat a woman, her back against the wall, her face hidden behind her hands. Her long alien hair covered her like a curtain, and her shoulders shook with silent sobs. "Mother," the boy whispered softly. The woman raised her head slowly, her eyes red from endless nights of crying. When she saw the human, she gasped and pulled the boy closer. Her voice cracked. "Why did you bring him here? Why? He cannot help us. No one can." The boy clung to her. "He will not leave us. He promised." The human felt the weight of those words press down on him. He had not promised anything, but the child believed, and maybe belief was all they had left. The woman shook her head, her voice bitter. "Your father left us. Your people hate us. Even our own kind turn away. And now you bring a stranger, a human." The human took a slow step forward, his voice calm but firm. "I don't know your story, but I know this. No one should cry alone." The woman froze, her lips trembling. Her eyes searched his face, looking for a lie, but found none. For a long moment, silence filled the broken house. The child held his mother's hand tightly, as if afraid she would slip away. The human stood there, waiting, knowing his choice tonight might change everything. Outside, the wind howled, carrying the echo of forgotten battles. Inside, in that broken house, a fragile spark of hope flickered to life. And that was how the story began. Not with a battle, not with a victory, but with a cry in the dark and a human who chose to listen. The broken door creaked as the human stepped inside. The air was heavy, filled with the smell of damp wood and forgotten meals. The boy's small hand held the human's sleeve tightly, pulling him deeper into the room. The human's eyes adjusted to the dim light. He saw how empty the house really was. A cracked table with no food, no bowls, not even water. A corner where blankets lay in a heap, thin and torn, and in the middle of it all sat the alien woman, silent and unmoving. She did not welcome him. Her gaze was fixed on the floor. Her hands rested in her lap, weak and trembling. She looked like a shadow of someone who once had strength. The boy whispered, "Mother, please, say something. He came to help." But the woman did not speak. She only pulled her blanket tighter around her thin body. Her silence was louder than words. The human crouched down, his eyes meeting hers. "I am not here to hurt you," he said softly. But her eyes were filled with doubt and pain. For her, trust was something already broken. The boy knelt beside her and clutched her arm. "Mother, don't push him away, please. He is not like father." At the mention of that word, the woman flinched. Her lips parted and a sound escaped, half a sob, half a laugh. "Not like father," she whispered bitterly. "No one is like him. He promised the stars, but gave us nothing. He promised safety, but left us in ruins." The boy buried his face against her shoulder. Tears rolled down his small cheeks. The human watched silently. He had seen wounds of war, But this was another kind of wound, one that left no scar on the body, only the soul. The human finally spoke again. I cannot bring him back, and maybe you don't even want that, but I can make sure your child does not starve tonight. His words were plain, but they carried weight. The woman raised her eyes slowly. There was a flicker of surprise, almost anger. You think food will stop the tears? You think wood for fire will fill the emptiness in my heart? Her voice shook, but her pain was real. The human did not argue. He only stood and walked toward the empty hearth. Kneeling, he struck a small flame from the tools he carried. The fire caught slowly, spreading weak light across the room. Warmth touched the walls for the first time in many days. The boy's face brightened as the orange glow filled the shadows. He whispered, "See, Mother, he keeps his word." But the woman turned her head away, unwilling to admit even this small comfort. The human placed his pack on the floor and pulled out a piece of dried bread. It was not much, barely enough for himself, yet he offered it to the child without hesitation. The boy broke it in half and tried to give the larger piece to his mother. She refused at first, shaking her head, but the boy pushed it into her hand. "Please, don't cry tonight," he begged. Her fingers tightened around the bread, and for the first time, her eyes watered not from grief but from shock. Someone was still thinking of her, even in her broken state. The human said nothing. He only sat near the fire, watching the flames. He knew trust was not built in one night, but he also knew he had taken the first step. Outside, the village slept uncaring. Inside, the house of silence breathed again. A weak fire burned, a child smiled, and a mother's tears carried something new. Not only sorrow, but the first fragile drop of hope. The night grew colder, but the small fire inside the house fought against the darkness. Its glow made the broken walls look less frightening, yet the silence of the room was heavy. The human sat quietly, his eyes drifting toward the cracked table in the corner. It was bare, not a single crumb of food on its surface. No fruits, no bread, no bowls for soup. It looked like it had not been touched for weeks. Dust had gathered, and the wood was scarred with lines of hunger. The boy noticed where the human's gaze rested. He lowered his head, ashamed. "We don't eat at the table anymore," he whispered softly. "There is nothing to put there, only empty plates." So we stopped. The human's chest tightened at the words. He had seen starving soldiers, whole villages after battle, but seeing a child speak with such quiet acceptance was different. It was not just hunger, it was surrender. The woman sat on the floor, her back against the wall, her eyes half closed, her voice weak. They promised aid after the war, but no one came. Neighbors look away when we ask. They fear if they share with us, they will starve too. So we are left with nothing. The boy clenched his small fists. He looked at the human with wide eyes. "Sometimes I steal just to make her eat. But when I do, they beat me. They call me thief." And she cries even more. The woman's eyes filled with tears. "Don't tell him that," she whispered, covering her face. But the boy's voice broke. "How could I not? He must know. She cries every night because of father and because of me. I fail her every day." The human felt a sharp ache in his heart. He could not look away from the child's trembling body. Gently, he placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. "You are not failing her," he said firmly. "You are still here, still trying. That makes you stronger than most grown men I have met." The boy's lips trembled. He looked at the human as if hearing such words for the first time. The mother raised her eyes slowly, her face pale, her hair falling like shadows around her. Her voice cracked. "Why? Why would you say such things? You are human, not one of us. Why do you care?" The human did not answer at once. He stood and walked toward the empty table. He brushed his fingers over its rough surface, then turned back and said, "Because no table should stay empty while children are still alive. Because no mother should cry herself to sleep when her child still has hope." The woman stared at him, unable to speak. Her heart wanted to believe, but her mind warned her not to. She had trusted before, and it had broken her. Yet the man's calm voice carried no lies, only quiet truth. The fire crackled, filling the silence. The boy leaned against his mother, whispering, "See, Mother, he is different. He doesn't laugh at us like the others. He doesn't call us cursed." The woman closed her eyes. Her hands gripped the piece of bread from earlier. Her tears fell silently, not just from sorrow, but from something she could not name. The human watched them both and made a silent decision. Tomorrow, he would leave the village to find food. He would return, even if the whole world mocked him for it, because tonight had shown him the truth. The battle was not against armies or empires. It was against despair, and he would not let them lose. The table remained empty that night. But for the first time in many days, the boy smiled in his sleep, and the mother, though still broken, held her child a little tighter. The human sat by the fire, eyes steady, a stranger in their home, but no longer a stranger in their fight. It touched the cracked walls, the dying fire, and the thin blankets on the floor. The boy stirred first, blinking at the sight of the human still sitting near the fire, awake and watchful. His small voice whispered, almost with relief, "You didn't leave." The human gave a faint nod. "I said I wouldn't, not yet." The boy's face brightened, but his mother remained quiet, her eyes heavy with doubt. She had heard words before, and words often vanished like smoke. The human rose, stretching his tired limbs. "I will find food," he said simply. The boy jumped to his feet, eager to follow, but the human shook his head. "Stay here, protect your mother, I'll be back." The boy nodded reluctantly, his eyes shining with trust. The mother turned away, whispering, "Don't waste your time. They will laugh at you, or worse." But the human did not answer. He stepped outside into the gray morning. The village was already awake. People moved through the streets carrying water, tools, and baskets. But when they saw the human walking toward them, their steps slowed, their eyes narrowed, whispers rose, sharp and cutting. "Why is he here? A human in their house? He doesn't know the curse, does he?" The human ignored the whispers and walked to the nearest vendor's stall. It was empty of kindness, but filled with roots, dried meat, and old bread. He reached for a bundle of grain, but the stall-keeper pulled it back. "You don't want this for them," the man sneered. "They are poison, cursed blood. Help them, and you will share their fate." The human's jaw tightened. "I asked the price, not your opinion." The vendor laughed coldly. "Price? For them there is no price. We'd rather throw it to the dogs than waste it on her." Around them, others began to gather, villagers muttering, shaking their heads. One old woman hissed, "She begged from me once. When I refused, she cried. Her tears wrought bad luck on my home. My husband fell ill the same week. Do you see? She carries darkness." The human's eyes swept the crowd. Every face carried fear, not reason. They had built a wall of superstition and left a mother and child to rot behind it. Finally he spoke, his voice steady. "Perhaps your husband fell ill because he was old. Perhaps your crops failed because the soil is broken. But I know this, blaming a woman for your misfortunes will not fill your table. It will only empty your souls." The words struck like a stone in still water. The crowd grew tense, their whispers sharper. A man spat on the ground near the human's boots. "Leave them, human. Your kind may not fear curses, but ours do. You will bring nothing but shame." The human did not argue further. He pulled a small knife from his belt and cut open a pouch at his side. Inside were rations, dried food meant for soldiers, enough for himself to survive a week. Without hesitation, he placed the pouch on the stall. "Then I will trade," he said coldly. "Your curses mean nothing to me, but hunger is real." The stallkeeper stared, torn between greed and fear. In the end, greed won. He handed over the grain and meat quickly, snatching the rations with shaking hands. The crowd muttered in disapproval, but none stopped him. The human gathered the food and turned away. As he walked back through the street, the whispers followed him like shadows. "Foolish human. He will regret this. He will cry as she cries." But he kept walking, his boots firm on the ground, his eyes steady ahead. He had no fear of curses, no fear of their scorn, for in his mind echoed only one voice, the boys. "Don't leave us, please." And so he returned to the silent house, carrying food not only for stomachs, but for hope itself, unaware that his defiance had already drawn the eyes of those who would not forgive such disobedience. "See." The boy waited at the broken doorway, his small hands gripping the frame as his eyes searched the street. Every sound made him jump, every shadow made him afraid. He had lived through too many promises that never returned. Then he saw him, the human walking through the dust, his arms full of food and firewood. The boy's heart leapt, his feet ran before he even thought. "Mother, he came back. He really came back." Inside the house, the woman stirred slowly. She had not slept, but drifted in and out of sorrow. When she heard her son's cry, she whispered bitterly, "Don't hope too much. It breaks faster than stone." But her voice stopped when the door opened. The human stepped in, carrying food enough for days, grain, dried meat, roots, even a little salt. His other arm held wood, heavy but strong. The boy's eyes widened as if he were staring at treasure. He touched the bundle with trembling fingers. "Is this really for us?" he asked softly. The human crouched, placing the food on the empty table. "Yes, it's yours now," he said simply. The boy let out a laugh, small but filled with relief. He ran to his mother. "See, mother, see? He kept his word." The woman rose slowly, her body weak, her eyes filled with disbelief. She looked at the food, then at the human. Her voice shook. "Why? Why would you do this? You traded your own rations, didn't you?" The human did not deny it. He lit the new fire with the wood, its flames strong and warm. Then he placed a pot on the hearth, filling it with grain and water. The smell of cooking soon filled the small room. It was not a feast, but to them it was more than riches. The boy sat close, his mouth watering. The woman sat back against the wall, her arms tight around her chest. Her tears slipped silently. "No one has given us anything since he left. Everyone turns away. Why would a human give more than our own kind?" The human teared the pot quietly before answering. "Because I know hunger, because I know what it is to sit in the dark and believe no one cares, and because your son asked, and I listened." The woman's lips trembled, her eyes burned with shame, and something else she could not name. She had begged before, and all she had received were curses. Yet here stood a stranger, offering without demand. The boy suddenly stood, rushing to the table. He placed 3 small wooden cups, cracked but still usable, onto the surface. He beamed with pride. "Tonight, we eat at the table again." The mother covered her face with her hands. Her body shook, not from despair this time, but from the shock of hope. The human smiled faintly, serving the food. The steam rose, filling the house with warmth. They sat together at the table, a boy, a broken mother, and a human, sharing a meal that felt like the first step into life again. But outside, unseen eyes watched the house. Villagers who whispered curses now whispered darker things. They saw the human's gift not as kindness but as rebellion, and in their hearts, anger began to grow. Inside, however, none of that mattered. The boy ate happily, laughing for the first time in many nights. The mother tasted food with shaking hands. Every bite felt like a battle won against despair, and the human, though silent, felt the weight of his choice. He had given more than food. He had given them a reason to breathe again. That night, as the fire burned bright, the woman looked at the human, her voice breaking. "I don't know who you are or why fate brought you here, but tonight, for the first time, I don't feel abandoned." The human only nodded. He had no grand words, only the quiet strength of action. And in that silence, his gift spoke louder than any promise ever could. The morning sun rose slowly, spilling pale light into the small house. The boy still slept near his mother, his hand clutched tightly in hers. The human had kept watch through the night, his back against the wall, his eyes never fully closing. It had been quiet, almost too quiet, and quiet often meant danger. By midday, the boy woke with a smile. He looked at the food on the table, the warm fire still alive, and he whispered, "Maybe things will be better now." His mother gave him a tired smile, though her eyes held doubt. She could not believe that a future waited for them, not yet. Then came the knock, loud, sharp, and full of arrogance. The sound froze the room. The boy jumped, his face pale. The woman stiffened, clutching him tightly to her chest. Her lips whispered only one word, heavy with fear. "Him." The door pushed open without waiting. A tall figure stepped inside, his steps uneven, his eyes bloodshot. It was the father, the man who had left. But he was not the same man anymore. His clothes were torn but lined with gold trinkets. The stench of drink clung to him, and his mouth twisted in a cruel smile. "My family," he said mockingly. "I have returned." The boy's body trembled, his eyes filled with both hope and dread. "Father," he whispered, but the woman turned away, her tears rising instantly. "You have no right to call yourself that anymore," she spat bitterly. The man laughed, stepping further into the room. "I see you survived without me, though barely. Did you cry every night, my dear? Did you pray for me to come back?" The words cut deep. The woman shook her head, her voice shaking. "I prayed, but not for you. I prayed for strength to raise our son, and you gave me nothing but shame." The boy clung to her arm, hiding his face, but the father's eyes turned on him with disgust. A weak boy, still crawling beside his mother. "You should have learned to stand without me." Before the woman could shield him, the father's hand lashed out. The slap echoed through the small house, striking the boy's cheek. The child cried out, stumbling back. The mother screamed, throwing herself between them. "Don't you dare touch him!" The father sneered, raising his hand again. But this time, it was caught. The human had risen, silent until now, his grip like iron around the alien's wrist. "Enough," the human said firmly. His voice was low, but it carried a weight that filled the room. The father twisted, trying to break free. "And who are you, human, to step into my house? You think you can touch me? This is my family, mine to rule as I please." The human's eyes narrowed, his hand tightening. "You abandoned them. The moment you walked away, you lost the right to call them yours." The woman's breath caught. Her heart raced at the sound of those words. For so long she had wanted someone, anyone, to say it. And now a stranger, a human, stood in her home and declared the truth she had buried in silence. The father's face twisted with rage. "You will regret this," he hissed. But the human did not release him until the man stumbled back, clutching his wrist in pain, his pride wounded more than his body. The boy looked up at the human with wide, tearful eyes. For the first time he saw someone stand against the monster who haunted their nights. And in his heart, hope burned brighter than fear. The father glared at them all, his voice dripping with venom. "This is not over. You will see me again. And when you do, you will beg for mercy." He turned and stormed out, slamming the door behind him. The silence that followed was heavy. The boy clung to his mother, his cheeks still red. She looked at the human, her tears falling freely, and whispered, "Why? Why would you risk yourself for us?" The human stood tall, his face calm. "Because, so no one should hurt those they claim to love, not even a father." And in that moment, the fragile bond in the small house grew stronger. The boy waited at the broken doorway, his small hands gripping the frame as his eyes searched the street. Every sound made him jump, every shadow made him afraid. He had lived through too many promises that never returned. Then he saw him, the human walking through the dust, his arms full of food and firewood. The boy's heart leapt, his feet ran before he even thought. "Mother, he came back. He really came back." Inside the house, the woman stirred slowly. She had not slept, but drifted in and out of sorrow. When she heard her son's cry, she whispered bitterly, "Don't hope too much. It breaks faster than stone." But her voice stopped when the door opened. The human stepped in, carrying food enough for days: grain, dried meat, roots, even a little salt. His other arm held wood, heavy but strong. The boy's eyes widened as if he were staring at treasure. He touched the bundle with trembling fingers. "Is this really for us?" he asked softly. The human crouched, placing the food on the empty table. "Yes, it's yours now," he said simply. The boy let out a laugh, small but filled with relief. He ran to his mother. "See, mother, see? He kept his word." The woman rose slowly, her body weak, her eyes filled with disbelief. She looked at the food, then at the human. Her voice shook. Why would you do this? You traded your own rations, didn't you?" The human did not deny it. He lit the new fire with the wood, its flames strong and warm. Then he placed a pot on the hearth, filling it with grain and water. The smell of cooking soon filled the small room. It was not a feast, but to them it was more than riches. The boy sat close, his mouth watering. The woman sat back against the wall, her arms tight around her chest. Her tears slipped silently. "No one has given us anything since he left. Everyone turns away. Why would a human give more than our own kind?" The human teared the pot quietly before answering. "Because I know hunger, because I know what it is to sit in the dark and believe no one cares, and because your son asked, and I listened." The woman's lips trembled, her eyes burned with shame, and something else she could not name. She had begged before, and all she had received were curses. Yet here stood a stranger, offering without demand. The boy suddenly stood, rushing to the table. He placed 3 small wooden cups, cracked but still usable, onto the surface. He beamed with pride. "Tonight, we eat at the table again." The mother covered her face with her hands. Her body shook, not from despair this time, but from the shock of hope. The human smiled faintly, serving the food. The steam rose, filling the house with warmth. They sat together at the table, a boy, a broken mother, and a human, sharing a meal that felt like the first step into life again. But outside, unseen eyes watched the house. Villagers who whispered curses now whispered darker things. They saw the human's gift not as kindness but as rebellion, and in their hearts, anger began to grow. Inside, however, none of that mattered. The boy ate happily, laughing for the first time in many nights. The mother tasted food with shaking hands. Every bite felt like a battle won against despair, and the human, though silent, felt the weight of his choice. He had given more than food. He had given them a reason to breathe again. That night, as the fire burned bright, the woman looked at the human, her voice breaking. "I don't know who you are or why fate brought you here, but tonight, for the first time, I don't feel abandoned." The human only nodded. He had no grand words, only the quiet strength of action. And in that silence, his gift spoke louder than any promise ever could. The woman sat nearby, her arms wrapped tightly around her child. Her body trembled not from despair this time, but from release. Her tears fell freely, but they were different. Not the bitter cries of abandonment, but the fragile tears of someone who had finally been defended. The human stood near the door, his blade resting at his side. His breath was steady, his eyes calm. The danger had passed for now, but he knew it would return. Men like the boy's father did not let go easily. Yet in this moment, inside this small broken home, he felt victory, not of war, but of spirit. The boy looked at him, his voice small but filled with awe. "You didn't leave us. You fought for us. Does that mean you're staying?" The human glanced at the mother, who quickly turned her face away. Her heart pounded at the thought, but her lips would not form the words. She had been left once before, and she feared to ask again. The human crouched, his voice steady and warm. "I will not walk away while you still need me." The boy's face lit up like sunlight breaking through clouds. He hugged his mother tightly, whispering, "See, mother, we are not alone anymore." The woman's lips trembled, her tears falling onto her son's hair. She whispered softly, "I don't know why you care, human, but thank you." Her words were heavy with emotion. She had prayed for help, and she had expected nothing. Yet here was a stranger who gave her more than food, more than fire. He gave her dignity back. The hours passed, and soon dawn crept into the village. The light touched the broken rooftops, the dusty paths, and finally the small house at the edge. The boy opened the door and stepped outside, breathing in the morning air. It felt different, lighter somehow, as if the shadows of the night had finally begun to fade. But outside, the villagers watched. They had seen the fight, heard the shouts. Some whispered that the human was foolish. Others whispered that perhaps he had done what none of them dared. For the first time, their eyes looked at the small house not with scorn, but with uncertainty. Inside, the human shared the last of his water with the family. He poured it carefully into cups and placed them on the table. The boy drank happily. His mother sipped quietly, her hands still trembling. The human raised his own cup, his voice calm. "To new beginnings." The boy smiled, repeating the words. The mother lowered her eyes, whispering, Maybe there is still hope." Outside, the sun rose higher, casting golden light across the village. The broken house no longer looked like a place of despair. It looked like a place where something had changed. The boy's father was gone, his threats still echoing in the distance, but he no longer held power here. For where once there was only silence and sorrow, there now stood a human who refused to leave. The boy ran to the doorway, looking out at the light. He shouted with joy, "Mother, it's a new day." The woman followed, her hand resting on his shoulder, her lips curved into a small, fragile smile. "Yes, my son, a new day." The human stepped behind them, standing tall. The morning sun lit his figure, casting his shadow across the threshold, and in that moment, the family knew. They had lost much, but they had gained something greater. Not riches, not promises, but a protector, a man who had chosen to stand when everyone else turned away. And so the new dawn began, not just for a mother and her child, but for the bond that had formed in the darkest of nights, a bond strong enough to face whatever shadows might come again.